Laid up with a fever so high I couldn't move, I asked my eldest son to bring me just a glass of water. I thought he would at least do this much, but what my eldest son brought me was a glass full of beer. Then he splashed that beer on me, who was in bed with a high fever. From the direction of the door, I heard a ha-ha laughter, and there she was, my son's wife, clapping and laughing. My eldest son was also laughing, holding the empty cup. I couldn't believe it. I was feverish and dazed, but that scene burned clearly into my eyes. "Clean the house by the time we get back, haha." I had tolerated Mark and his wife's selfishness up to now, but I couldn't stand it any longer. "Yes, I will clean it," I said, enduring the pain in my throat so that my son and his wife could hear. "My name is Helen. I'm a 73-year-old housewife. My husband, George, is 75 years old. Now that he's retired, he teaches calligraphy to children at a nearby community center. My husband, who has been practicing calligraphy since he was young, had always dreamed of opening a calligraphy class after he retired. I was happy to see him realize his dream and head to the community center with a smile every day. We have 2 sons. The younger son is married and has 2 elementary school-aged children. However, our 44-year-old eldest son was unmarried and living with us at home. He seems to be working part-time at a convenience store at night, but that's only about 4 days a week. He doesn't contribute any money to the household, and he's just living a lazy life. Both my husband and I have warned him several times, but our eldest son didn't listen. He's not gambling or in debt, and gradually my husband and I stopped warning him. Then one day, out of the blue, our eldest son suddenly said, "I got married," and brought his wife home. Without even greeting us, she barged in as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and from that day on, I had to prepare meals for her as well. I didn't mind preparing meals for my son's wife, but she didn't help at all, nor did she clean up after meals. She didn't even say thank you, and she even demanded a cup of coffee after dinner. My husband, unable to watch any longer, harshly warned our eldest son and his wife, who then stopped making unreasonable demands in front of my husband. However, when my husband wasn't around, she started making demands like, "Mother-in-law, please take this dress to the cleaners for me." I thought she was being too selfish, and when I warned her, my son took her side. "It's just something you can do on your way to shopping. Don't be so stingy," he would say. However, our son doesn't contribute a penny to the household. Even though we're feeding him and his wife for free, I thought it was unreasonable for them to demand more, and I was considering whether or not to talk to my husband about it. However, not wanting to witness a parent-child quarrel, I decided to wait and see a little longer, and so I held back again today, and as per my daughter-in-law's request, I took her clothes to the cleaners. My husband and I usually visit our second son's family in Canada about twice a year. We were planning to visit again during the upcoming week-long federal holiday. Since we visit frequently, and they also occasionally come to visit us, our grandchildren have become very fond of us. We have already bought the toys that our grandchildren love as gifts, and we're planning to buy a roll cake as a souvenir on the way. When we visit our second son's family, we often take the sleeper train rather than the plane, enjoying the scenery along the journey. While the view from the plane is great, now that we have more leisure time, taking the train suits us better. The day before our visit, feeling unusually excited, I went shopping after seeing my husband off to his regular calligraphy class. On my way back from shopping, I stopped by a cake shop where they were selling handmade cookies. I figured the cookies would last longer than the cake, so I bought some for the grandchildren. As I made my way home, picturing the delighted faces of the grandchildren, it began to drizzle. I hurried home, but the rain gradually became heavier. I decided to stop by a nearby convenience store to buy an umbrella, but by the time I arrived, my clothes were soaked. I considered waiting out the rain at the convenience store, but not knowing when it would stop and wanting to warm up my chilled body in a hot bath, I bought an umbrella and hurried home. When I got home and was about to take a bath, my eldest son's wife came in and said, "Helen, are you about to take a bath? I have to go out now. Let me use the bath first." "Helen, please start preparing dinner early." And she closed the bathroom door. Even though it's not her house, I changed clothes and started preparing dinner, trying to ignore her. While preparing dinner, I started sneezing. It would be bad if I caught a cold right before our departure tomorrow, but my eldest son's wife, who had long been in the bath, did not come out for over an hour. The next morning, the day we were supposed to visit our second son's family, I woke up feeling sluggish. My throat hurt and my nose was running. When I checked my temperature, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It seemed that I had indeed caught a cold in yesterday's rain. I told George to go alone this time because I didn't want to pass my cold on to the grandchildren. George suggested that we cancel the visit, but we already had the sleeper train tickets. We also had the toys we bought as gifts for the grandchildren, so I wanted George to visit our second son's family, even if it was just him. I gave him the cookies I bought at the cake shop the day before. Despite George's concern, I reassured him that it was just a slight fever and a minor cold, and that I would be okay after taking some medicine and resting at home. George usually doesn't talk much to our eldest son and his wife, but that day he told them I was feeling under the weather and made them promise to take care of the housework. After seeing off George with a smile, I was about to go back to bed when I heard my eldest son and his wife talking. Ugh, such a hassle. It's just a cold, right? But now that Dad's gone, we can be free for a while. I couldn't believe this was coming from the people who were living in our house without contributing to the expenses, but it was the usual for them. You do realize the only reason you're able to live here is thanks to your father, right? When I pointed this out, my eldest son Mark and his wife seemed to take offense, retorting, "We're doing you a favor by living with you in your old age." And that's right, normally everyone would hate to live with their in-laws, the daughter-in-law added. It's ironic, as they're the ones who moved in with us without being asked, yet they act as though they're doing us a huge favor. Despite feeling sluggish and wanting to rest early, I ignored their remarks and returned to my room. That evening, my daughter-in-law came into my room and woke me up. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning on skipping cooking just because you're feeling a little sick, are you? You know I can't cook, right?" Telling your mother-in-law to cook because you can't isn't something a 35-year-old woman should say. I'm feeling sick and I want them to figure out their meals by themselves. Even my husband should have warned them before leaving in the morning. I tried to ignore them and go back to sleep, but my daughter-in-law won't leave the room. I thought it would be better to eat something light and take medicine, so I forced myself to get up and head to the kitchen to prepare some food. As I was preparing the meal, Mark came home. Despite seeing me in the kitchen wearing a mask, he didn't utter a word as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Not only that, but he also demanded, "Hey, the bath isn't ready yet." It doesn't matter to Mark and his wife whether I'm sick or not. Knowing they wouldn't listen anyway and wanting to rest as soon as possible, I finished preparing the meal and went to prepare the bath. When I returned to the living room, Mark and his wife were having a lively conversation while eating. "We're going on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so please don't spread your cold to us." Surprised by their sudden mention of a trip abroad, I ate a light meal in the dining room, away from the warm living room, as my daughter-in-law suggested. In the living room, the couple was excited about their upcoming trip abroad. Mark is taking time off his part-time job, and they're going on a 3-week trip to Europe. I hadn't heard anything about them going on a trip abroad, but I was grateful that they wouldn't be home starting from the day after tomorrow. On the morning of the day Mark and his wife were about to leave for their trip, my cold had worsened to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. When I measured my temperature with the thermometer, I had nearly a 103-degree Fahrenheit fever. I was thirsty, but my headache was so severe that I couldn't even lift my head. In this state, Mark came to me. "Hey, cook us some food. You can still cook even if you have a cold." Tears welled up in my eyes at the sight of my son telling his sick mother to cook. "Eat out," I managed to say. At my words, Mark frowned, but said nothing and started to leave the room. Before he left the room, I asked him to bring me a glass of water. I thought he would at least do that much for me, so I waited, but what Mark brought me was a glass full of beer. And he splashed that beer all over me, who was bedridden with a high fever. From the direction of the door, a loud laughter echoed. When I turned to look, it was my eldest son's wife, clapping her hands in amusement. In front of me, my eldest son Mark was also laughing, holding an empty cup. It was unbelievable. Although I was dazed with fever, that sight was burned clearly into my memory. "Make sure you clean the house before we get back, haha," I had tolerated Mark and his wife's selfishness up to now, but I couldn't stand it any longer. "Yes, I'll keep it clean." I mustered the strength to say loud enough for them to hear, despite the pain in my throat. After that, Mark and his wife cheerfully left the house. I didn't even have the energy to wipe the beer-soaked mess from my face, and I fell asleep as I was. When I woke up, I felt somewhat refreshed. With a groggy head, I remember being splashed with beer by Mark, but surprisingly, I didn't feel sticky at all. The covers of my beds were also changed. Just as I was questioning what happened, my husband George came in with a basin. Seeing me sitting up, he placed his hand on my forehead and asked, "Are you okay?" "Why is George here? Wasn't he supposed to be with our second son's family?" I tried to ask but couldn't voice it out. Noticing my confusion, George began to explain. He had taken the sleeper train to visit our second son's family, but he was worried about me and decided to return early. He didn't trust Mark and his wife to take care of anyone. Our second son's family also suggested he should hurry back, so he flew home. When he arrived, he found me lying exhausted in bed with a strange smell of beer lingering around. He quickly cleaned my face with a damp towel, tidied up the area, and cared for me while I slept for a full day. When George asked me what had happened, I tried to explain, but my voice failed me. The memory of being splashed with beer by Mark brought tears to my eyes. Seeing this, George brought me some water and said, "Sorry, I shouldn't have asked you now. Just rest for now." He then went to prepare me some porridge. It turned out he had prepared the porridge so it would be ready whenever I woke up. The kindness of George brought tears to my eyes again. Thanks to George's care, I regained my energy in about 2 days. When I told George what had happened while he was gone, his face turned stern. "I can't stand it anymore." Yes, me too. 3 weeks passed since Mark and his wife left for their overseas trip. While I was enjoying peaceful days with George, my phone rang. It was a call from Mark. "Here it comes," I said, pressing the answer button. "What the hell? Why is our house gone?" "Well, didn't you say to clean the house?" Haha. After I recovered from the cold, I told George everything about Mark and his wife's actions. How they forced a sick me to take care of things. How they threw beer on me, who was bedridden with a high fever, and went on an overseas trip themselves. After hearing my story, George muttered, "I can't stand it anymore." Until now, I had always been the one to calm George down, but after this incident, I didn't feel like pacifying him anymore, because I myself couldn't forgive them. Actually, my husband George and I had been secretly planning to build a new house without telling our eldest son and his wife. The house isn't finished yet, but we moved into a monthly rental apartment and sold our house in order to stun them with the news. We had been told that someone wanted to buy our land to build a shop, so the sale happened quickly. Originally, we had planned to keep the old house for our eldest son and his wife, but after the way they treated us, there's no need to consider them anymore. The place has already been turned into an empty lot, so they must have been shocked to find the house gone. The new house will be completed in about 2 weeks. A carpenter we know has allowed us to store our belongings and furniture there in advance, as we've explained the situation to him. We dispose of all of our eldest son's and his wife's belongings. When we told him this, our eldest son shouted, "Are you kidding me? I'll report you to the police." His wife was also yelling in the background. At that moment, my husband George took over the phone and I switched it to speaker mode. He said to our eldest son in a low voice, "Go ahead, tell the police. I'll tell them too. You guys threw beer at your sick mother and then went on a vacation abroad. You even forced her to do housework while she was sick. Who do you guys think is a bigger sinner, you guys or us for disposing of your things?" My husband's face as he spoke to our eldest son was like a villain's. "This has nothing to do with that. In selling the house, where are we supposed to live? Where are you guys even staying?" Our son yelled back. George replied, "That house was originally ours. It's our right to sell it. Plus, you're no longer our son. Don't contact us anymore." And then he hung up. 2 weeks later, we got a call saying that our new house was completed, so George and I headed over. The call was from the carpenter, a friend of George's. He's about 60 years old and the site supervisor. He showed us around the house, explaining the layout. We designed it as a single-story, accessible house, keeping our future retirement life in mind. It's an even more beautiful house than we imagined, and we can't wait to start living there. The furniture we had left in the living room had been moved by the carpenters. When I thanked them, they laughed and said, "No problem. George really helped us out back in the day, so this is nothing." And so the two of us, George and I, started living in our new house. The house was even more comfortable than we had imagined, and our life was peaceful without our eldest son and his wife around. However, about a month after we moved into the new house, our devilish eldest son and his wife showed up. Neither George nor I had told them our address, and our younger son Mark and his wife shouldn't have told them either, because we explained the situation. They probably hired a detective or something to find us. "Hey, it's not fair for you to sell the house, dispose of our stuff, and then move to such a nice place by yourselves. As your eldest son, I have the right to live here, don't I?" said our son, glaring at us with large bags in his hands. We had intended to cut off ties with them, but we were stunned to see our eldest son and his wife, who were clearly intent on moving in. Just then, George came from the back of the house. "What are you guys here for?" "To what end? After taking our living place, how dare you ask such a thing? From today, we're living here too." As they were about to step in, the front door opened. "Huh? Mark, what are you doing here? Here to cause trouble again? Come on, you're old enough to stand on your own 2 feet. Stephen said with a look of disbelief on his face. Beside him were his wife with their 2 grandchildren. They were visiting because the new house had just been finished. After relaxing at home for a while, Steven's family had gone to a nearby convenience store.
Who is that? Are they bad people?
The 5th grader, Sophia, said it so innocently. The husband who had just been about to drive Mark and his wife away suddenly had an idea. While Steven's family is staying for a week, you two should also stay here. I won't allow you to squat here indefinitely, though. With that, he welcomed everyone at the entrance into the house. The living room gathered, and the first to lounge on the sofa was Mark and his wife.
Man, I'm beat, mother-in-law. Can I have some coffee?
I'll take mine black. Steven's wife was taken aback by the casually made request of Mark and his wife. At this, the grandchildren rushed to Mark and his wife.
Why can't you two do that yourselves when you're adults? Even I, a kid, can pour my own juice.
The innocent comments of the grandchildren made Mark's wife uncomfortable, and she went to pour her own coffee. However, the grandchildren's why attack continued.
Why can't you cook even though you're an adult woman? My mom can cook anything. Why don't you clean up after yourself? Both my dad and I always clean up the plates when we're done eating. Why can't you do that? My sister and I always do it ourselves.
The grandchildren, perhaps due to good upbringing by Steven's wife, are responsible and often help her. Steven also doesn't just leave everything to his wife, and they work together. Therefore, it was probably perplexing for the grandchildren that Mark and his wife didn't do anything themselves. At first, Mark and his wife had retorted, but the why attacks didn't stop, and by the end of the week, they were both exhausted. Mark's wife in particular seemed to dislike being called auntie.
Don't call me auntie,
she told the grandchildren in earnest. But when they replied,
why not? You're an auntie, aren't you? You're not young enough to be called sister,
she was shocked. Even I and Steven, who were listening nearby, couldn't help but laugh. After Steven and his wife left, we sent Mark and his wife away. They were worn out by our children's incessant, why are you attacking us? So we were able to drive them away without much resistance. However, a few months later, we received a message asking, can you lend us some money? Up until now, they had been staying in our home, eating our food without paying a cent in rent or living expenses. Since Mark, our eldest son, was making enough money from his convenience store job to cover all expenses, it wasn't a problem at all. Now that they had been kicked out of the house, Mark and his wife were supposed to start paying for their own rent and living expenses. Yet they kept spending money as they used to, seemingly living off borrowed money without any savings to speak of. Their only income was Mark's salary from working at a convenience store 4 days a week. Mark's wife, it seemed, had no intention of working. Considering their situation, it was audacious, to say the least, for them to ask, can you lend us some money? We will never lend you money in the future, nor will we help you, we told them, and then blocked Mark's number. A few days later, while my husband and I were out, we received a call on my husband's phone from our home security company. There was an intruder in our house, and they sent us the video footage. It turned out that Mark and his wife were trying to sneak into our house through a window. It was pitiful that they were resorting to breaking into their parents' house to steal money because they were broke. At least they hadn't caused trouble for others, but that's not saying much. Mark and his wife were quickly apprehended by the security and were taken away by the police, who were called to the scene. They were released because they were family, but not before being harshly scolded. Since then, Mark and his wife stopped forcing their way into our house or trying to break in. We have both blocked their calls, so we never receive phone calls from them. According to Steven, our second son, he also received a request for money from Mark. Apparently, Mark had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now on the run because he couldn't pay it back. You reap what you sow, pay back the money you borrowed yourself, Steven said, and blocked Mark's number as well. We don't know what happened to Mark and his wife after that, but we chose to forget about the people who would laugh as they poured beer over a sick person. With no involvement with Mark and his wife, my husband and I are enjoying our peaceful, everyday lives. My husband used to teach calligraphy classes at the nearby community center, but now he teaches at home in a room we designed for that purpose. When Steven and his family come to visit, the grandchildren and other children take calligraphy classes together, and they seem to be having a good time making friends. I am grateful for these peaceful days and am making the most of each day.